that there were boys out, they were playing, and they saw something go across the sky, and they got a pretty good look at it, and they went up after this, and that's what started the whole thing. But can you set the stage and describe it step by step what actually happened with this incredible case?
Sure. Well, after the object passed over Washington, it flew about 200 miles west. It was sighted over Virginia and portions of West Virginia. It headed into northern Braxton County, made a 45-degree angle, and it headed south. Mm-hmm. Now, if you look at a map, an important part here, Richard, is that Flatwoods is the geographical center of West Virginia, and it is void of any Air Force or military installations. So this, which is what I believe through my research, it was a predetermined area where this thing went down. It didn't land in the middle of Air Force base, near Air Force bases. It landed in the middle of the woods, up on a mountaintop. When it hit northern Braxton County, it made a 45-degree angle turn, and it actually followed State Route 4. And this is interesting because it actually followed the highway, and which is void of mountains, because this thing was flying erratic. There was pieces coming off of it. It was heard making noises. And when it flew over the area of Burnsville, that's where it headed south.
Okay.
And I have witnesses who saw this thing flying at treetop level. It flew into the Flatwoods area, and it flew over the Flatwoods Elementary School. And there was a bunch of kids playing there that night. And it was somewhere around 7:30. And the kids look up, and they see this thing coming over the mountaintop from the north. And their jaws dropped. And here's this big thing flying directly over their heads. It made a 45-degree angle turn, and it flew across the road up onto the Bailey Fisher farm.
Now, before you go any further, you spoke with at least one or maybe more than one of those witnesses, didn't you?
Yeah, quite a few of them.
Right, and they were, and how would
the
how
one
would
who
they
worked
describe
with
it?
me the most
Right.
was Freddie May. I've met several of them, but I worked real close with Freddie.
And how did he describe this?
Freddie was actually at the school playground, and he saw the monster as well.
Right.
And I actually went to the school playground with Freddie years ago, and I interviewed him, and we went step by step. And the kids looked up, and they saw this gigantic thing flying over the school playground, and it turned. It slowed down, and it had flames coming off of it. The thing was damaged, and it flew across the road, and it went up onto a plateau area called the Fisher Farm. And Freddie said some of the kids thought it was a flying saucer. Some of the younger kids said it was a meteor. They didn't know what the hell it was.
Right.
So they all dropped their equipment, whatever they had. They dropped the ball. They all start running up the street, and they head up the road to the house of Kathleen May, and she lived on Depot Street. And they all come busting into the door. Gene Lemon, who was with the kids, 18-year-old, he was a National Guardsman. That was Mrs. May's first cousin. Mm-hmm. All the boys come piling in, and they say, Kathleen, something landed up on the back hill. Now, her property basically borders the Bailey Fisher Farm. It's a dead-end road. The train depot is down front at State Route 4, and the road cuts up behind it. It turns left, and that's where Kathleen's house is. Off into the back, which basically would be the backyard, is where the thing touched down.
Okay.
All the boys are in there screaming. They want to go up and see what it was. Kathleen was a beautician. She had just got home from work. Here's all the kids excited. Some of the kids chickened out, for lack of better words, and didn't want to go up there. They saw this thing, and on second thought, they ended up leaving and going home. And I talked to two of those kids.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, over the years, and one of them said it was probably the biggest disappointment of his life, because he had a chance to see the monster, and he chickened out, and he ran home to Shaversville.
Yep.
But Gene Lemon and Kathleen are there now, them basically being the two adults. Each one of them grabbed a flashlight. There was a dog that accompanied the May family, and it was Freddie May's dog. this dog followed the group, and another kid had joined the group. He was Tommy Hyer. He was a little 6-year-old kid. So by the time all in all is done, there's 8 kids up there.
And most of them are, most of them are actually old enough easily to know what's happening. You've got Kathleen May. She's an adult. You've got Gene Lemon. He's 18 years old and very responsible.
Right.
And a bunch of other younger kids who are like 13, 12, 13, 14.
14, yeah. 13 years old, 11, 10, and 6.
Yeah.
So you have this group going up there, and these, like I said earlier, Richard, these kids grew up in there. You know, not like a lot of the city kids today walking around with their cell phones. That's all these kids did, was play outside and play in the woods and play cowboys and Indians and army. So they knew every inch of this property in that area.
Sure.
So they take off and they go up onto this back part of the farm. And here's an important part, Richard, the layout of this farm. There are actually 3 fields. The first field, which borders the property, that's a wide open field. The second field, there's a big gully, and it's a big sloping area. And in the far back of this gully, there were some trees, different fruit trees. The third field is where they saw this thing touch down, which is way out in the back. And it's actually a plateau. It's not a mountain with a point. It's a flat plateau. It's approximately the size of a football field where this thing touched down. So they're going up. They cross onto the property. They're walking, and they take a left at 45 degrees. They walk up the path, and they go into the area where it's a cow. There's cows set up, and there was horses in there. They all get up to this big gate, and they open the gate up, and they pass through the gate. They wired it back closed. In the meantime, there was a German Shepherd dog from the neighborhood who had joined them. So you have May, all the boys, a German Shepherd, and you have the May family dog, which was a little dog.
Okay.
They're walking up along the path. Okay, now this was called the wagon trail, Richard. Okay, it was like a wagon path. It was dirt. To the left is the woods, to the right is the gully.
Yeah.
They're looking way the heck back there to see where this thing touched down up on the top of this plateau. Over to the left-hand side where the woods are, they see something up ahead, and it's a fog that's rolling down the hill, and it smells like sulfur. It's kind of a burning. It was penetrating their nose.
Okay.
So they start going around this little swag, as Mrs. May called it. It's this little swag. They reach another fence, which was basically pillar to post. This was just an area where they had to cross over, and it was a wooden gate. It was just nailed shut. They started climbing over this gate. As they got up a little bit further, they noticed the smell was starting to be a little bit stronger. I said German Shepherd before. It was actually a collie. This collie darted out in front of them, and it ran around this swag, and it disappeared, and it went into this low-laying fog, Richard. And the thing started carrying on up a racket, and it ended up, it yelped, it barked, and it turned around, and Mrs. May told me it ran back like a flash of lightning. It ran back towards the house. At that point, some of the kids had went forward over this wooden fence. You had Mrs. May, Lemon, Neil Nunley, the older boy, Eddie, and Ronnie Shaver. They went forward. Freddie May, Teddy Neal, and little Tommy were at that gate at the point where Mrs. May got up to the tree. Now, this tree to the left was over 100 feet tall, and it was an oak tree. It's set back.
100? That's huge. That's massive.
Yeah, it's a big, giant tree.
Yeah. Okay.
And it's set back on an incline about 5 feet. Okay, it's not level with the path. It goes up about 4 or 5 feet. And this big tree, this is the area where this smell and this low-laying fog is emanating from. Now, Mrs. May told me when she got up to that point there, it was starting to get dark, and her and Lemon were carrying the flashlights. They were leading the path. You always have two flashlights. They told me in case one battery goes dead. You always got two flashlights.
Good idea.
So Freddie May, who I worked very close with, he was at the fence ready to climb over it. So he saw the view from a distance as it unfolded. What happened is Mrs. May said she heard this noise that sounded like thumping bacon. Frying bacon and thumping noise. It was like a rhythmic, like hitting a conga drum. And this frying noise, and she said it was like grease and oil, bacon.
So it's like a sizzling sound, kind of.
Yeah, and she said she had no idea what it was, and she's hearing this thumping noise. And as they got closer to the tree, this sulfur gas stuff is starting to get stronger, and it's billowing and rolling down the hill. And Gene Lemon and Kathleen were the two closest at this point. And Neil Nunley, the other older kid standing behind them, they looked up to the left, and right at the perimeter of the tree line, they looked up approximately 12 feet in the air, and they saw these two reddish glowing eyes. And they thought it was an owl or a raccoon perched up in a tree. And they're looking at this thing, and simultaneously Kathleen and Jean flashed their flashlight up at it. They wanted to see what it was, because it's starting to get dark. And Mrs. May said that the second she flashed this beam of light and it hit it, the thing lit up. And it was a giant metallic structure. And it wasn't an animal, it wasn't an owl, it wasn't this or that. She said it was a metallic structure.
And also, if I'm remembering you correctly on this, it wasn't in the tree. It was just to the side of the tree, wasn't it?
Right. It was basically hiding, Richard.
Yeah.
It was off to the side of it. That's why they didn't see it at first until they almost got right next to it. And I said, Kathleen, how close were you to this damn thing? She said, as close as a car, the length of a small car. You're talking like, a Subaru or a Volkswagen. She was within a few feet because it was to their left. They didn't see it till they were almost on top of it.
Yeah, maybe like 10, 15 feet at the most, I'm guessing.
Yeah, and this thing actually lifted, and it made a noise, and it lifted up into the air. What it was, Richard, it was a propulsion system. Mm-hmm. And as this structure lifted up, it coasted down that little incline, went in front of the dirt path, and Mrs. May said it was leaking and spurting this oil out.
But it was floating then, right?
Yeah, it was actually hovering.
Right.
And from working with her and Freddie sat down with me, and he did a drawing, and he believes that what the source of the sulfur and smoky stuff that was coming down the path was actually part of the propulsion system, or the exhaust system, because this thing was hovering. It hovered, it came down the incline, it went right in front of him. Mrs. May said Gene's knees just got wobbly. He almost, he did hit the ground. He almost passed out from fright. This thing came right across in front of him within a few feet. It went to the right, and they all got a good look at this thing, and Mrs. May said that it reacted to him. And I was very adamant about finding out when this thing lit up. She said it glowed from the inside. And we're talking with Freddie over the years, one of the analogies he gave me is the way this thing lit up is getting into your car at night, and you put your key in the ignition, and when you turn it on, your dashboard lights start glowing, orange or blue. And he said that's what it looked like. It like glowed from the inside, like somebody turned the key on and started this thing up, you know what I mean, Richard? And it lifted, and the beams of light that actually came out from the eye area were actually porthole openings. Freddie said it was like looking at a house across the street at your neighbor's house at night, where you could see that orange yellowish glow. And the thing was actually, it was some type of an inner helmet with an outer helmet, and Freddie and Kathleen both told me it was some type of a protective piece of glass, like plexiglass, in front of this thing. And talking with Freddie a couple of years after, and Richard, I want to bring the point up. I worked with these witnesses and interviewed them hundreds of times. It wasn't I went and I interviewed Mrs. May once or Freddie or talked to. I talked to these people for years.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't I went and did one interview and I went home.
Right.
Because as I would talk to them, I would do drawings, I would do composites, sketches, and I wanted to see what this thing really looked like, because what the show portrayed was a joke. And being a trained illustrator, I was able to sit down with them.
When you say the show, do you mean the original TV show? Or?
Yeah, the We the People TV show.
Right.
They had it as a claw-waving monster wearing a dress.
Right.
What the dress interpretation of the artist, Mrs. May was explaining what the lower torso looked like, and it was flared out, and she was trying to describe the pleats of a dress or the drapes in her windows, the way they hang and they roll down and they're evenly spaced.
Right.
So he took it literally and drew the monster in a dress.
Mm-hmm.
Freddie May sat down with me, and Richard, I remember he held his arm out straight in front of him, and he said, "Frank, see my forearm?" He said that thing had pipes going around the lower circumference, equally spaced, and they were as thick as my forearm.
Wow.
Like a fireman's hose,
Wow.
he said. And then he stood up, and he spread his arms apart, and he said it was about this wide at the base. And it was just 4 to a little bit wider than 4 feet at the base. And he said, and it tapered up towards the shoulder area about 3, just maybe over 3 feet. So, and then it had some type of a pointed outer helmet with this covering, and the red head that was drawn and portrayed in the original drawing in 52,
Yeah.
the wrong one, it was actually an inner helmet. And Freddie brought up to me at one point, he says, "Frank, you know what it kind of reminds me of, looking at the head area? It was like a fighter pilot sitting in the cockpit of his plane. The canopy over the top was actually the protective helmet of the Flatwoods Monster, and the pilot sitting inside had his inner helmet on." And that's the analogy he gave. So he said this thing, it was definitely mechanical, and he said this thing was being controlled, the way they saw it and the way it reacted.
Yeah, so what you're really describing, it seems to me, is the description that everyone was drawing. What they were actually seeing was a very involved mechanical suit, protective suit for the actual being that was inside it. And so
Right,
they weren't seeing the being that was some kind of robot. They were seeing a kind of very, very...
probe.
Yes, exactly. That
It was some type of a probe.